The Jaguars are being criticized for the hire of Liam Cohen, and although I'm not 100% sold on the hire, I do like the direction of the team. Moving on from Doug Peterson, as much as I love him as a coach, was honestly the right move. And if we're just looking at this team, there's young pieces, and I really want to talk about how bright I believe their future is. Look, this team was pretty bad last year, but I think you can contribute a bit of that to coaching and some of it to injuries, so let's go ahead and get into it. It's not news to anyone that the Jaguars were horrendous in 2024. They finished bottom 10 in yards and defensively gave up the second most yards. Minus 115 point differential just isn't good at all. The defense's secondary was pretty horrendous too, but they still have a bit to build off of outside of that. The O-line surprisingly wasn't that bad, allowing less than 2 sacks per game, and I really think the team was bad due to most part in coaching and just overall how the roster is actually constructed. The Jaguars have one of the most underrated rosters in the league. The O-line is very solid. Walker Little has been a good left tackle, only allowing 2 sacks all year. And on PFF, he's graded as a 72.8, which puts him in one of the better tiers of tackles. But even then, I still think that's a little low for him. The rest of the O-line was fairly average, but they weren't awful. The top end of the skill core really shines for the Jaguars though. Tank Bigsby was averaging just over 4.5 yards per carry. He had 766 yards rushing along with 7 touchdowns. Brian Thomas Jr. is one of the best rookie wide receivers and honestly one of the best in the entire league. He was snubbed from the Pro Bowl originally, but because of people sitting out, he got in. And he was 3rd in the league in the entire yards. And this was with only alright quarterback play most of the year. That we will touch on a little more in just a bit. Now, there's a whole lot of depth at the skill positions, but a lot of it was injured and just didn't quite live up to expectations. Christian Kirk and Gabe Davis spent time injured, like I said, and otherwise I think this team could have been a bit better if their depth didn't get so hurt. But during their times, it was still disappointing. At least Gabe Davis only put up 200 yards in 10 games, while Kirk had less than 400 also in 10 games. And I think this team could use a more consistent receiver to fill the 3 slot. And I think Christian Kirk, though, can rebound next year to be a decent option as the wide receiver 2 for them. I think who's arguably one of the most controversial quarterbacks in the league is Trevor Lawrence. I don't think he deserved his max term deal, but I do think he's still a solid quarterback. The 5th-year option honestly would have been a perfect on a QB like Trevor Lawrence. You get to extend him a year without needing to throw him an absolute bag, and it allows you to find out more about him and if he's truly your future. But in my opinion, Lawrence still is the talent. I think one of the things hurting him has just been consistency. He's dealt with a couple different OCs, and Lawrence at times plays great, but most of the time he's just very hit or miss. I still like him as the Jags quarterback next season. I think he's capable of winning a playoff game. He's shown it before. But if it doesn't go well this year, I think you have to start considering your options and the possibility of moving on. Travon Walker is often overshadowed by Aiden Hutchinson, and there's a reason to that, but Travon Walker has been great in his career so far. He plays great on the opposite side of Josh Hines-Allen, and Travon Walker brings a bit more of the power while Allen brings speed. Devin Lloyd in the middle has been a very solid linebacker for the Jaguars, and he's had 113 tackles this season, and I think there's still a little space for him to make another jump. I think Lloyd will end up as a top 5 middle linebacker in the league sooner rather than later, and outside of these 3 guys though, the defense just isn't very good. Eric Armstead is solid in the interior D-line, but that's about all. But at the same time, like I've been saying, there's some really nice top-end talent on the Jaguars. It's just about filling out the holes on this roster. With that being said, I think when you're looking at this roster, you have to consider at least beefing up the offensive line. The interior of the defensive line could use just one more stud or at least average player, and you really have to fix the secondary. But outside of that, I think it's a very solid team with a bunch of high upside talent like Brian Thomas Jr., Travon Walker, and Devin Lloyd. We know Josh Hines-Allen is good, and we're still waiting for Trevor Lawrence to prove himself. This team has pretty decent draft capital and cap space. They're around the middle of the league in cap space, and they don't have too many guys to re-sign. They hold the 5th pick, and with how talented the top of the class is, they're bound to get someone good unless they do the Jaguars thing. They have 2 third and fourth rounders, and we don't know the GM yet, but he'll have a decent amount of cap space and he'll have some pretty solid draft picks to work with. But I think the 2 key things for the Jaguars this year from a roster building standpoint, you have to improve your secondary and you have to beef up your offensive line. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed and have a good one.